Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose. Today's read was something that I picked up after seeing it recommended over and over again online. I didn't really know the plot, but I could gather that it was either folk horror or just weird and disturbing historical fiction. After reading, I would personally say the latter. It is disturbing, but I don't think it's horror per se, though I do think it's still perfect for this time of year. It's medieval fiction with a heavy dose of what in God's name is happening here, so I think it fits the bill pretty well. So, with that, let's talk about Lapvona by Ottessa Moshfegh. Spoilers ahead, and this book does go into a lot of dark topics, so there's a good chance that we will be talking about things such as paedophilia, sexual abuse, rape, physical violence, that kind of thing, so viewer discretion is absolutely advised here. Lapvona is the small township we find ourselves in, following a small cast of characters. There's Marek, a 13-year-old boy who was born with a series of disfigurements. He, along with everybody else, is extremely God-fearing, though everyone seems to have conflicting and strange ideas about what it means to be truly pious. He's rather gullible, though it makes sense. He especially believes everything his father tells him, even though most of it is just his father's way of covering his tracks, quite frankly. And his father is Jude, and he's a dirty nonce. He raises lambs for the village and is actually the cousin of the Lord of Lapvona, who we'll get to later. He doesn't reap benefits from this relation until much further down the line, and even then it isn't like he becomes a lord of a manor in his own right, so he isn't actually Marek's father, but raised him in that vein. He found Marek's mother running through the forest, presumably escaping bandits. He could have rescued her and been normal about it, but no, he finds this tongueless teenage girl as a grown man himself, ties her to a tree, and repeatedly has his way with her. And she isn't the only young girl he has eyes for during the book. He's just weird. Like, the way he shows his piety is very strange. Like, the whipping himself is time appropriate, but there's a lot going on with him that's just... look, spareth the rod, hateth the child, or whatever that Bible quote is. That's, like, something to be expected in a book like this, I guess. But I think there are still limits to this, and the fact that Marek ends up loving getting beat just gives you a hint of the freak shit going on with them. There's also Inna. She was once a wet nurse for the village, though lives as somewhat of a recluse just outside of the village itself. She nursed both Jude and Marek, and that comes back in perfectly normal and non-harrowing ways later on. In her old age, she has no milk left to provide, but now serves as a medicine woman. She can talk to the birds, she's blind as a bat for most of the book, and made me nervous every time she was on the page because I knew some fuck shit was afoot. We also have William, the Lord of Lapvona. He's a Blackadder character, which is something I'll dive into later. He's a caricature of a balmy aristocrat who's easily bored by everything. He needs to be entertained at all times like a small child and has zero ability to take anything seriously. He has a son, Jacob, who is around the same age as Marek, and those two even form a sort of friendship. However, this takes a turn and sets up the main plot for Marek in particular. Jacob and Marek are out on a walk, and Marek fibs, telling Jacob where he can find some sort of bird to hunt, as hunting is one of Jacob's favourite pastimes. He's a taxidermist. Yes, he is a teenager, but quite frankly, it's medieval times. There isn't much else to do. But when they arrive to their destination, there are no birds about, and after a rock is hurled at Jacob by Marek, it does miss, but Jacob loses his balance, taking a fall off the side of a cliff edge and dying, which is... there are some harrowing images in that, but done very well compared to some of the other disturbing factors in this book. But Marek tells his father of this, and they take the body back to the manor house, and a strange deal is made where William takes Marek as his own son, while Jude has to take Jacob back down the hill to the village and bury him as if he were his own son. Now, I'm going to be honest and say that I don't think I'm the biggest fan of this book. Throughout, I felt like Mosfeg's writing just wasn't consistent in what it wanted to be, and it felt like she didn't know how to handle reveals, and there were just certain aspects of the disturbing factor of this book that went in a direction I just wasn't comfortable reading. And look, I know that disturbing media is meant to make you uncomfortable. There is a difference between this is gross and icky and I am uncomfortable and I don't want to be reading this because it's making me viscerally upset. Both of these features are in the book. Anything with just adults, bar one scene, I would put in that first category. I'm uncomfy, I'm disturbed, but that's what I went into this book expecting. However, there are a large number of scenes pertaining to children that I just wish I hadn't read. At 13, Marek quote unquote nurses from Inna, though like I said, she has no milk left, and it is made clear that when he's nursing her, bear in mind this, we get too much detail on this given that he is a child and she is, I think it says later on that she's about 100, or that's what it seems like anyway. She's an old woman, but when he's nursing he tries to move his tongue in order to try to pleasure her, and we are told that she has previously allowed him to perform oral on her, and that act is framed in his mind also as like a nursing act. He thinks of it as getting milk from another part of her body, obviously, because when he's performing the act on her there is something produced because she's getting aroused. And later on, while not in great detail, we do have a recount of Jude's rape of Agatha, who's Marek's mother, when she was still a teenager, and when she's an adult we have a more detailed telling of this act repeated as he ponders how her body has changed since she was a child. Were I not reading for review, I would have stopped reading this kind of early on. I was a little under 50 pages in where I had the first inkling that I just wasn't enjoying myself, and that was because I'd learned about Marek trying to arouse Inna. I felt like I was being bombarded with terrible and disturbing things, but there didn't seem to be much of a cause for me learning about this. And no, there doesn't have to be an explanation for everything, and of course there is a good amount to read into with this book, but there just feels like a lot of nastiness, especially early on, for the sake of it. I am fine with being disturbed by media, and I am fine with serious and dark topics being covered, but this didn't feel like that for me. It didn't feel like it was handled well. There's a lot of conversation about the way that rape is used in fantasy media and historical fiction, and that's often tied to the idea of a male gaze or a male fantasy. I remember there being a lot of think pieces on this kind of thing when Game of Thrones was still popular. Mosfeg writes about those kind of topics in the kind of ways that were talked about in those think pieces, and I do think that's kind of disappointment to see a woman talk about topics like that in this way. It all just felt tonally wrong, which is frankly a running theme through this book. So let's at least step away from the nastiness for a second, because comedy in dark fiction is not unusual, and in concept not something that I frown upon. We all love a bit of dark humour or gallows humour, and it can provide a bit of well-needed levity in fiction that's kind of nasty in subject matter, even if it feels like you shouldn't be laughing in that moment. But the thing to bear in mind when writing something like that is there should be a tonal match. The humour either has to be as dark as the subject matter, or it has to be used to throw you off kilter. And while Mosfeg sometimes gets it right, that really doesn't happen often enough. The scenes with William feel, as I said earlier, like they're lifted out of something like Blackadder, and unfortunately that isn't a compliment. If they ever were to adapt Lapvona, though, I can absolutely see someone like Hugh Laurie playing William, because I think he'd be the perfect fit, but that is besides the point. scenes with William just don't have any sense of grounding to them, instead making it feel like a pantomime. He seems like he's supposed to provide some kind of sardonic relief to the horror of everything else, but I just found it exhausting to read. I'm seeing the horrors of a drought in the village while he lives at large in the manor because he has a dam that means he suffers through nothing. This could be a great commentary on the ways that the rich are divided from the poor, and in ways it is, I guess, but if he felt more real, it might have been more impactful. I think he's meant to be the kind of pre-revolution French aristocrat living it up in Versailles, and he does fit that bill. He has no sense of reality, and everything is a pleasure quest to him, but it was hard to place sometimes whether or not I was supposed to be laughing. There was a good juxtaposition between him and the village during the summer months, but it just felt like Moshfegh couldn't quite stick the landing. Like, it is funny because it feels like it's lifted from Blackadder or Monty Python, but the execution just wasn't quite right here. Like I said earlier, humour obviously has its place in dark fiction, but it does have to fit the tone. I mentioned how Mayfly does dark humour quite well, and in talking about that, I talked about American Psycho in a similar vein. Both use humour to make you laugh in a way that feels a little bit naughty. Junji Ito also uses humour all the time, either in that sardonic kind of way or just creating grossly funny stuff. But it all comes down to knowing the tone that you've set. Like, even because it's children's fiction, I did my huge video on Darren Shan last year, and he uses dark humour all the time. Now, it's age appropriate dark humour, but it is still stuff that makes you giggle in dark moments. But the scenes in the manor feel like if there was a Monty Python "he's not the Messiah" type line in Midsummer right as Danny becomes the May Queen. But if you are going to do that kind of thing, do a really jarring tone shift. You have to make it feel more purposeful. When it was out in cinema, I watched the recent Speak No Evil with James McAvoy, and I can imagine his character saying something that's supposed to be funny in any other context, but it feels utterly jarring because of what's just happened mere minutes before, because everything he does is there to put you on edge. It would be and feel purposeful, and yes, the purpose here is to set William apart so completely from the village, and at times make it really clear that the priest is an absolute phony, but there comes a point where it's like, but you've made your point really clearly by now. You're not doing anything with this. There's a line towards the end where the priest is giving a sermon and talking about miracles, and one of the congregation says to him, "You said Jesus turned fish into bread," which is obviously just a mix of miracles with water to wine and the loaves and fish being multiplied to feed more people. This shows up way too late in the book, though. It's like, by this point, we already know he's an incompetent fraud, and this line showing up when it did, while it did get a little giggle out of me, just felt like it showed up at the wrong time. A line like that early on would have been a great way to subtly suggest to the audience that the priest isn't as competent as he makes out to be to his flock. It's the sort of thing that could make you go, wait a minute, and sow seeds of doubt before any proper confirmation of his lies. But the thing is, while there are things to read into with this book, for me, subtlety really isn't Moshfegh's specialty. Where detail could be useful, it feels like she leaves it out, and where lead up and breadcrumbs could make a moment feel huge, she just throws things at us, making them feel meaningless. Jude tells Marek that Agatha is dead, but we just get told she actually ran away and ended up in a nunnery, and we get told in a similar manner that she was already pregnant by the time that Jude was violating her, and that Marek is actually the product of incestual rape by her brother. Her brother is also a bandit that we see hanged and dismembered early on in the book, but that doesn't really amount to anything. The fact that that is Marek's father, it's sort of brought up towards the end where we have this revelation, but it doesn't feel like anything. I checked back to see if there were any signs that maybe I was just a bit sort of I don't know, I was already feeling it with this book, so I was just writing this off. But I look back, there are no real signs when Marek is with, because he goes to him early on and he prays over him, and I believe he kisses his forehead. And the only sign that there is anything similar between them, I think they have the same colour eyes, but Marek can see evil in the bandits. And the only thing I can think of that's meant to be like is that he really felt the need to, like he felt compelled to pray over him. And that there was the eye thing, but it just didn't feel like anything. And with the bandits, William sends them into the village to keep things running how he needs, and that info is just dropped on us rather than being something that's discovered by someone. There are many reveals such as this throughout the novel that Mosfeg just hands out like they're nothing. And look, her matter-of-fact style works well in places. You don't linger on some of the horrors going on during the drought, because to these people, it has become everyday life. Or the fact that Inna sometimes eats slugs, that's just handed out there, because it's like, yeah, that's gross, but it's her everyday life. It's no longer something to linger on, so why do that for the audience? I like that. And certain things get thrown out there that take you aback, but again, it's because it's mundane to these people, even if that isn't true to the reader. But there are times which you really could have benefited from sitting in a moment. Jude and Inna resort to cannibalism during the drought, and this is something that these people before the drought didn't even eat meat because that was ungodly to them. And now they're having to resort to eating people. And it really should be more of a moment when Jude and Inna are having to resort to this. In particular with these two. And especially the point where Inna is eating this man's hand. It seems like she's about to go into some kind of detail with it, but there's no time spent on it, and it's just something so strange. And I don't even mean that she needs that gory, nasty detail, but just something about the strangeness of a hand would have been nice to have a bit more detail of. But I just feel like her style would be better suited to short form narratives far better. Not just short stories, but even novellas compared to full novels like this. In shorter form content, you can get away with just stating a lot more than you can in longer form stuff because you don't have as much time. So you can't linger on the little details in the same way, but a lot of the reveals are just made to feel meaningless here, and that's a real shame. I think Mosfeg has a lot of the pieces and tools to put together a really great story, but unfortunately just missed the mark with this one. She clearly is a talented author, but there is just something that didn't hit here, and that's such a shame because it is so clear that it held so much potential. If her other work is shorter form, I would be interested to see how she handles that, because I suspect that's much more maybe in her wheelhouse. There are still complaints that I have regardless of her skill, mostly to do with the way she handled some of the darker aspects of this novel, and that isn't just something that can be fixed by simply being in a different form. Maybe that's just my sensibilities, and others do just find it disturbing but have no actual issue with the way it was dealt with, but for me, I found some of it abhorrent, and I just wish it had been left out, or at least gone into less detail. But like, she misses out detail where it could be interesting, but let's really get to understand the ways in which Jude raped Agatha, or when he sees that. Sorry, she doesn't know when to use detail and uses detail in the nastiest places, and that can be really effective. But she does it in ways that just, they didn't disturb me, they upset me, if that makes sense. Like I said, I went into this book knowing that it would be disturbing. And I enjoy some disturbing media. But, and they can even handle topics of, I read crime fiction, never true crime really. I listen to some true crime media, but I only read about true crime if it's non-fiction. Rather than retellings, but I don't mind reading about disturbing topics if an author understands how to handle them. But frankly, Moshfegh didn't. And anyway, look, next week, I just want to move on. I just want to move on. Next week, we're on a library find, and the next few weeks I've actually got planned up to the end of the year now. I've got hello Lily. I've got, because I originally planned up to Halloween, and then I decided, well, why not plan up to the end of the year? So up till Halloween, we have a couple that are my books, and most of them are library books, to be honest. And then after that, we've got all stuff on my bookshelf, because I want to actually sort that out. I actually want to read stuff from my shelf, because I haven't been. But next week is no. But this is another book that I'm pretty sure I've seen recommended online. Don't quote me on that. I feel like I've seen it in just some like quick fire horror recommendations. I feel like it's a satiric. I think it's a. You can tell I'm upset by talking about this book. I think it's like a satirical book, but it's, at the very least, it's an exploration of like beauty standards, wellness culture, that sort of thing. It's called Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. I am really looking forward to that, because I love cool explorations of the way that like beauty and wellness and all that sort of stuff is handled. I watch a lot of stuff about influencers who talk about tummy teas and that sort of thing, because I find it gross, and it's just, yeah, I'd be interested to see how horror handles that. Like, I watched The Substance recently, and while the ending is still something I'm trying to figure out if I like, the film is obviously phenomenal. But if you've read this book, as in Lapvona, let me know your thoughts down below. Whether you agree or disagree with me, I am just interested to see what you think. Actually, I was about to say I still have 1 or 2 spaces. I don't now. I did when I was writing the script. I had a couple of spaces left to fill for my Halloween read. But you can still recommend me your horror novels, or just like Halloween-y type books. They don't have to be all out horror. They can just be like strange media like this. But yeah, just let me know what you're reading for spooky season, or as you're settling into the autumnal months, like it is chucking it down outside while I'm recording this. It really is settling into my season, given that I am autumn, so settling into my season. And yeah, I'm still interested to learn about it, because I love reading horror. I don't watch it too much. I watched Weapons in cinema, which I was surprised by, but that's because I was promised that there aren't too many jump scares in it. And there aren't. I don't remember any. There's like one that I remember, but it's not a jump scare type film, which is my kind of thing. I prefer psychological if I'm watching in cinema, or like if I'm watching a film, but I prefer reading horror, because I feel more comfortable with it, because I can't suddenly get jump scared. Apart from if I'm reading like Junji Ito and I turn the page, but that's not like a jump scare in the same way. But hello, cat. There is a fat Zelda coming to say hello to me. You got anything to say? No, she just wants to give the microphone a sniff. That's okay that she doesn't have anything to say today. But do feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and feel free to ring that notification bell, all the cringe shit I'm supposed to ask you to do in my videos. But most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you are watching this. Take good care of yourself. Right.